Game Design 2, Lecture 4, Segment 3. Let's do a bit of trivia. So, at the beginning of this lecture, in the introduction, I asked who doesn't love puzzles, and I kind of picked on crossword puzzles a bit, which we'll talk about in a moment. But I also want to ask, are trivia puzzle mechanics meaningful puzzles, good puzzles, fun puzzles, engaging experience to put into your interactive applications, your games? Think about your answer for just a second. Would a trivia game be a fun or engaging experience for a player? Well, I mean, they can be. It depends on how it's done. A lot of times people say they don't like crossword puzzles because they're vocabulary tests. If I asked you, do you find my FSO quizzes fun? I mean, it is kind of a trivia game, if you will. There is a right answer. There is a deterministic way to solve them. It requires reasoned effort, right? Everything we talked about in the last segment. But are they fun? Not typically. Not too many students would say taking a test is fun, even a multiple choice one, written as well as the ones that I've put in FSO. But let's talk about trivia as a good or bad puzzle experience, because we find trivia games all over the place. Why? Is it because they're social? Is it because it appeals to the club killer competitor where I can prove that I have more knowledge about a subject than you? Well, what about this version here, where they put one of these on my table and I'm sitting in a Buffalo Wild Wings or whatever sports bar, and the questions are up on the screen and I'm putting in the answers at my table? We see this all over the place. I mean, NTN, National Trivia Network, is a large provider, one of the major players in the space, and there are a lot of them out there. So if quizzes, if knowledge checks, if tests aren't a fun version of a puzzle, why do we see it all over the place? Any thoughts? Again, it could just be that you want to be competitive. You want your name up on the leaderboard as knowing more about sports or pop culture or whatever the category of trivia is. But I would say that it's largely because they're not pure trivia experiences. It's not just know it or you don't. There are other cross-feeding systems, cross-feeding mechanics involved and at play. So if you don't happen to know the answer to the trivia question, there's still a way for you to compete. Let's do it. Let's try it. Let's do this live and play a little bit of trivia. So the way these systems work, the way the mechanics of the NTN trivia system is, it first prompts you with the question. So now maybe you know it, maybe you don't, but immediately following the question, it will give you your multiple choice answers. So now I have a possibility space of 5, and I have to figure out who killed Jabba the Hutt. If I know it, I pick it. If I don't know it, I guess. Because the way the mechanics work is immediately when the choices are listed, the timer starts, and the question is currently worth 1,000 points. As time progresses from, let's say, 10 seconds down to 0 seconds, the value of the points, or the point value of the question, also reduces. So 2 seconds later, with 8 seconds left, it's only worth 800. Oh, and look what happens. It gives me a little clue, a little hint, a little help. It says, don't go solo. What does that mean? It means, yeah, if I guessed A, I should probably change my answer because I know it's not Han Solo. Now, if I change my answer to say B, and that's the right answer, I only get 800 points at this moment. But let's keep going. Let's say I do. I choose B, and the next 2 seconds pass, and it says, not your father. Oh, well, Darth Vader, that was his father. Also, Vader means father, so probably not that. Let's go ahead and pick C. Oh, here again, I'm terrible at this game. Let me go ahead and see what the next clue that it gives me is, because I know it's not Chewbacca. That last clue, the last prompt that it gives you before time runs out, what is it? The first 3 were what it isn't. This fourth and final clue is a spoiler. It's giving you the answer, a royal pain, Princess Leia Organa, with the chain on the casino barge. That's who killed Jabba the Hutt. And if I didn't know that until this point, I could still salvage 200 points. And that's really the cross-feeding system that is employed by trivia games like this one in order to make up for the fact that you might not know the answer. It's not just a knowledge check. It's a knowledge check, and if you have the knowledge, you get the most points. But there are other systems and mechanics at play that allow you to make up for deficiencies in your knowledge and still be competitive. And I'll tell you this personally about me, I'm terrible with names. I typically do not remember names. They're not logical, and I just don't for whatever reason. And two particular types of names that I'm the worst at are athletes, sports stars, and actors and actresses. I can remember character names. I can remember Leia Organa, but I might not be able to tell you what's her name. Jodie Fisher played her. I hope that's who played her. Yeah. And that's what the most of these bar trivia games are, is pop culture and sports, movies, TV, entertainment, and sports. And I'm terrible remembering those names, but I can hold my own because I know how the mechanics work. And I know how to quickly pick a guess, and then quickly determine what it isn't based off of the clues that it gives me along the way. And this is another really interesting thing, and you're going to see me geek out about this, and you're probably like, dude, it's just trivia, chill. But this is actually a recursive reduction of possibility space. Remember, in the last segment, that's what makes it fun, the reduction of the possibility space. So here, I get to guess at an answer, and if I don't know it, it gives me a clue to what it isn't. So it doesn't just say it's not A, it's not B, it's not Han, it's not Vader. It gives me a clue, and then I use that clue, and I reduce the possibility space to figure out what it's talking about. And if it's talking about Han, I can cross that off my list, so I can ultimately reduce the possibility space for the larger question by figuring out what it isn't. So that's why these mechanics can be so engaging, because the player feels as though they are the one figuring it out. Even though you're really reducing the possibility space for them, these mechanics are doing it in a way that still makes the player feel like they're the ones getting to reduce the possibility space. So they still feel like they're having fun and they're answering the trivia questions, even when really you're like, no, dummy, it was D. You just have to find a better way to phrase it. And we'll talk about that more here in just a minute when we talk about breadcrumbs. So that's my little bit on trivia games. And again, lots of folks equate the same sentiment, the same feeling, the same pitfall in it just being a knowledge check to crossword puzzles, which are largely regarded as just a vocabulary test. If I don't know what a 5-letter word for pushed is, how would I ever figure it out? Well, the answer is you have other mechanics in crossword puzzles to help you reduce the possibility space. One, the most obvious is if I don't know what 1 across is, I try to do 1, 2, 3, and 4 down. Right? If I figure out that it's a 5-letter in the English language, huge possibility space. It means pushed, reduces a little bit. It starts with S. It starts with Q, whatever it starts with. Even more so reduces the possibility space. And every letter that I get across, helps me eliminate the possibility of all the downs alike. So that's the main mechanic, but there are other more subtle, less known mechanics in crossword puzzles that do the same. For example, if it ends in ED, the clue is past tense, the answer is probably past tense. If the clue ends in S, the answer is probably plural. And then there's all kinds of other little things like the little words like ERE. If you need a Q that's not next to you, cat, QAT, is an actual word. And guys like Dan Fayer, professional crossword puzzlers, they know all of these little tricks and tips and strategies to help reduce the possibility space as they are competing, as Dan Fayer is here, in the World Champion Crossword Puzzling Championships. Yes, it's a thing. And yes, he did win this year. And in order to win, to be the world champion crossword puzzler, you simply have to get the correct answer in the shortest amount of time. Now, that sounds pretty obvious, but if you're a guy like Dan Fayer competing at this level, you might need a little bit of practice. You might need to, collect data, analyze that data, and form an action plan. So here is a chart of the times in which Dan Fayer solved the New York Times crossword puzzle by day, Monday through Sunday. Now, you might not know it, but the crossword puzzle that is printed in the New York Times gets more difficult throughout the week. Mondays is the easiest. Sundays is the most difficult. Now, I'm going to ask you why in a minute, but just take a look for here, just a second at the chart. Dan Fayer can complete the Monday New York Times crossword puzzle, the easiest version, consistently in under 2 minutes. That's insane. In that crossword puzzle I showed a moment ago, it would take me 2 minutes just to get the first few words. He can consistently do the most difficult in plus or minus 6 minutes. That's pretty impressive. That's world champion, results. So that's interesting, but my question to you is going to be, thinking back to the flow diagram and engagement, do you think that Dan Fayer achieves flow as he is completing these crossword puzzles, as expert and as skilled as he is? Just a quick reminder, let's review in case you forgot. The flow diagram graphs challenge on the vertical and skill on the horizontal. So if something is extremely challenging and I don't have enough skill to rise to that challenge, I'm frustrated. If I have tons of skill, but there's not enough challenge to keep me engaged or challenged, I'm bored. If I don't have a lot of skill, but it doesn't matter because there's not a lot of challenge, of course, it's apathy. And it's that near upper right quadrant that is the flow channel, where I'm trying to balance and match an appropriate amount of challenge to the level of skill that my player currently has. But notice, it's not the entire upper right quadrant. If I were to graph Dan Fayer, a champion, he's probably so skilled that there is no amount of challenge that is going to keep him in flow. Likewise, I've put myself on there just for fun. Lots of challenge, and I don't have enough skill. By the way, I'm also a terrible speller, so there's nothing worse than doing a crossword puzzle, knowing the word, spelling it wrong, and then realizing that many hours later when it's messed you up the whole time. Your weekend New York Times solver, yeah, they're probably going to hit in that flow channel. But if you're still wrestling with, do champions hit flow? Think about professional esports players. If I'm a professional Overwatch or League of Legends player, do you think that they hit flow? Do you think that they lose track of self-consciousness, lose track of time? Do you think that they are or loss of self-reflective consciousness? Do they feel like they are that player swinging that sword? I would say not. I think that they know exactly where they are. They're in a competition or they're in a practice session, and they are fully aware of the mechanics, not the experience wrapped around it. And often when interviewed, they say, I hate this game. I play it all the time, and I don't like playing it. It's a job to me. So that's the difference, and a lot of game developers will tell you the same thing. Is I used to love video games, and now that I've picked it as a profession, I would rather do something else with my free time. It's not that they don't have the skill and that they're frustrated with it. It's just that they have so much skill. They know so much about it. They can't help but focus on the mechanics. They can't get immersed and escape into the experience, and they're typically not going to hit flow. So that's our look at trivia and crossword puzzles. One last quick note on this flow diagram. The diagram doesn't extend all the way to the lower left either, because it's very difficult to start the player in a state of flow. Typically what we do is we let them start. They've got 0 skill, so we give them a little bit of challenge, and then they increase their skill to meet the challenge. So we up the challenge level, and they gain more skill. more challenge, more skill, more challenge, more skill, more challenge, more skill, more challenge, more skill, and ultimately they're up into this flow diagram. Again, that's why your weekend New York Times solver, that's why the New York Times publishes different difficulty levels. So if I know that I'm a bad crossword puzzler, I can start with Monday or Tuesday. I'm not going to try to do Sundays right off the bat. That's me being down here. I need to get a few wins under my belt, figure out some of those tricks and strategies and weird little words. Go ahead and do a Scrabble cheat, like I'm sure everybody that I've ever played Words with Friends does, and look up all the possible words that these letters could potentially factor into. And it's only after a number of weeks, months, years of doing that that I get my skill level up to an adequate level of challenge where a Friday or a Saturday puzzle is going to put me in that state of flow as I'm just going through it instead of looking everything up online in Google. Typically, if your player has to go to the web to figure out your puzzle, probably not doing it right. We're going to talk about that next in our section on breadcrumbs, but for now, that's it on trivia. Look forward to discussing more in the next segment.